here at Durban Trade Port, the Design Indabar, we're going to be looking at the lighter side of green. We've got a couple of speakers who have come up with some beautiful, fun ways of addressing the world's problems through creativity and innovation.
In 1991, with about 2 weeks' notice, the Soviet Union stopped delivering hydrocarbons to Cuba. The Soviet Union was disintegrating and they didn't need to be funding an island. The United States and Europe had embargoes against Cuba, as they still do, and the ships stopped arriving with product that is essential for transport, for fertilizer, for everything to do with agriculture. The next step was that they stopped delivering medicine, they stopped delivering food. The second largest export of Cuba's was oil itself, because they had it from the Soviet Union, but they re-exported the surplus after they had used what they needed. It was a radical transformation of the Cuban economy. They lost 80% of their imports, they lost 80% of their exports, the GDP fell by 34%, food and medicine stopped coming, oil supply dropped to 10% of previous levels, and within 2 years, Cuban's petroleum consumption dropped to 20% of its pre-1990 levels. Everything came to a grinding halt. Australian permaculture experts arrived to assist them with farming. And within a period of a few months, under a year, the average weight loss of Cubans was about 9 kilograms or 20 pounds. Engineers, architects, lawyers, business people became agriculturalists. Buildings that were deteriorating in the cities need to be demolished, and they became food lots. Suburban gardens, roses, and their pretty flower beds became food. Cuba's entire economy was transformed by this circumstance. Today, even 80% of Cubans' agricultural production is organic food. They have now discovered oil off the coast of Cuba, and the decision in the Cuban government is that they will not consume it. They will sell it to the oil addicts. This is Charles Darwin, who has had a massive impact through his thinking on evolution, not only on the scientific world, but on almost every part of human endeavor. The key thought that he introduced, or insight that he introduced into thinking, was that, through his research, was that survival of the fittest, in other words competition, was the way in which species evolved. That evolutionary innovation was the consequence of species competing with each other, or competition within species. And it has driven our thinking very deeply and continues to do it around the world in almost every facet and every sector. We evolved like this because we competed. Recently, in the last 10 years, people like Bruce Lipton, a PhD teacher in medicine in the United States, has been doing research which has begun to indicate that this is in fact not the way that species primarily evolved. That the way in which species primarily evolved is the same way in which cells primarily evolved, which was that for 30 million years, life on this planet was single cell, amoeba, bacteria. And that for 30 million years, there was incredibly little evolutionary innovation. The evolutionary innovation skyrocketed when the cell divided. And the reason is that cells were able to specialize. First, they divided into like cells, and then those cells differentiated from each other. And then they formed tissue, and they formed organs, and then they formed different species, and then they formed an ecology. The underlying lesson of this is that it was not competition that did this, it was cooperation. The next story is about global population distribution. The figures are not unfamiliar to people. They are radical urbanization over time, exponentially. And 2007 was the first year in the existence of any species, particularly humans, that there are more humans urbanized and therefore living in cities than there are humans living outside of cities. This is the first time it's ever happened. It is the first time it will ever happen. it will not happen again, and it happened in 2007. So that's an interesting fact. But the more interesting thing about that is that this is the first time that we make our habitat rather than living in the habitat in which we found ourselves. This is the first time that we are not responding to an ecology or a habitat that we evolved from, but we are making the one in which we live. One of the very interesting other things that Bruce Lipton and his colleagues understood or have come to understand is that the physical environment in which a cell finds itself has a massive influence on the evolution and the programming of the cell's DNA. DNA not only has memory, but it is reprogrammable. And they have found that this is the case not only with cells, but with tissue and organism, and we know this common term called muscle memory. It is the same with everything. The environment that a living organism finds itself in affects the nature of the organism at a DNA level. We who design the physical environment in which the human species and other species now find ourselves in are altering the DNA of our species. As far as we can see, looking around the world over time, there are three basic city types, three kinds of environments in which more than 50% of the human population live and that are affecting our inner core nature. The first we call the symbolic city, and it's not to do with time. This happens to be an old city, as an example. This is also a symbolic city, or became a symbolic city. This is Paris, when these huge boulevards were cut through an organic city, and symbols were established. A symbol basically means the essentializing of meaning. So these boulevards were cut through this organic city, and it became a symbolic city representing the intentions and ideals of the powerful. This is a symbolic city. It is not a real city. There is no commercial, social, or cultural engagement between these people at an incidental level that would generate an innovative cultural, social, or economic environment. This is just a machine for the centralization of wealth in Asia. It looks like a city. People say it has the parts of a city, but it is not a city. Nor is this another part of the same place. It's a symbol of a city. It's a replica of a city. It's a stage set of a city. This is an equally fake version of human habitation. This is a group of people in America, and it's very popular here. Not far from here, there's a place called Mount Edgecombe, which is similar to that, and it seems to be very popular in itself. That is not a city. That is what is called a simulacra. It's a parallel look-alike of a place to live. This is a city. And this is an example of a developmental city in our view. The objective of a developmental economy, a developmental city in terminology we know, is essentially what the governments in South Africa have promised, which is a better life for all. It intends to offer a better life for all, but the strategy to do that is that we pay lots of funds and taxes to the central government. They decide, or provincial government or metropolitan government, and they decide on our behalves what they shall do for us. This is actually not a city either, because the primary components of this investment are totally disconnected from one another. If you look on the left-hand side, that's the exact same scale portion of Barcelona, same scale. Every meter is the same size as a meter on the left as is on the right, as Umhlanga Ridge, right? Look at the infrastructural investment required on the left compared to how much consumption of it, how much economic, cultural, and social yield there is from that investment compared to on the right. How much length of water pipe on the left and right for how many users, electricity, sewage, refuse collection. Why is the per capita economic contribution, the contribution per person of the GDP, in the left-hand model so extremely high compared to that of individual people on the right-hand side? It is a flawed model on the right-hand side. It is the alienation of people from one another so that they don't actually have to communicate with anyone other than people like themselves. And what innovation has ever come from the same group of people sitting in the same room having the same conversation? That is not what happens on the left-hand side. That is why the one on the left-hand side has been around for very long, and the right-hand one will not be certainly not in its form. This has been around for a long, long time. This is the beginning of a systemic city. This is the origins of a true city. So is this. Extremely resource efficient, infinitely resource efficient. We are the only species on the planet whose waste is not the food for another species. This is a systemic city. This is a systemic city. A city of systems. The systemic city is one where investment is investment in systems to which enterprise attaches itself, and that's where the innovation happens. The connectivity is provided by central authority. The action and the innovation is provided by people who attach themselves, and organisms and organizations that attach themselves to the system in order to be productive. And in our view, what we call the Big 5+1, these are the elements that are the backbone of the fundamental systems that matter. Food, we are running out. Less is produced than is consumed. Water, the same, particularly in our part of the world. We are an arid country. Energy, waste, I've mentioned that, and the natural ecology. If we do not retain the natural ecology, we will not survive. And the +1 is the social economy. Because as has been said earlier, if humans are not happy, we shall destroy the rest. So those are the primary systems to which all else can be attached. This is a GIS-based mapping system that indicates that the mechanics of it is to essentially trace every movement route, everywhere where people walk in an Islamic city, this example, Shiraz, across the whole city, and that's basically the outline of the city. Red indicates the movement routes that are most connected to every other movement route, most connected to every other, and blue at the other end of the color spectrum is essentially a cul-de-sac. So connectivity is where economic productivity happens. This is the map of this city is very different to the one that's coming up, and this system, the system of movement here, is specifically designed in order to filter strangers out of the system and allow people in who are from this culture. So they know the map of the structure of the city, and they can find their way from the perimeter to the center and back out again. This is London. The Thames is obvious, and there's a diagonal line through the middle there, which is the most integrated in this mapping system movement route in this portion of Greater London. And as you move from red out to light blue on the outside, going through the oranges and yellows, greens, blues, so the integration is less and less. The economic, social, and cultural productivity maps of this city maps this system pretty much exactly. The movement route through the middle that is red is Oxford Street. It is the most highly productive retail street in the world. Because why? It is the most connected retail street in the world. Most people can get there most easily. So this is a map of the movement, transport, or energy system. It's also the map of all the other systems that were on that list, because all those other systems travel pretty much in the same geometries. The common thread between all of this is this. The ecology, the word ecology means the mutually beneficial relationship between different things. That's what happened through evolution. Evolution made diversity because diversity enables cooperation, and cooperation is fundamental to our innovative evolution. Nature has worked like this forever. We have alienated ourselves from it. We have distanced ourselves from it. Perhaps that's been a positive thing. Perhaps that's been the only way in which we've been able to exploit resources to the extent that we've been able to develop technology that will enable us to reintegrate with nature. But it is our only hope. Reintegration. We cannot keep removing the resource that feeds us. We have to become part of the system again. And these are the choices that we need to make. Do we want this or this? This or the devastation of it? Recent business deal. Or do we want this, where we build together in cooperation with each other, not in isolation from each other, where we cooperate, where we operate as an ecology, where we who are different from each other have relationships that are mutually beneficial, not just as humans, but across all of our activities and connected to the ecology from which we have evolved. It is time for a consciousness to evolve, which is happening, for us to leave behind the obsession of materialism and enter into the room of great enlightenment, happiness, prosperity, actually, so that the disparity between rich and poor, South Africa is top of the global list, is shrunk so that we can have a life, all of us, individually and collectively, that is inherent in our makeup, a life of productivity and communal action. COP17 is a conference around that, but it is possibly also a conference of world power players getting together to make their own arrangements that have no impact on us whatsoever. It is time for all of us, not through protest and military action, but through our own actions, through the values that drive our own activities, to step by step, grain of sand by grain of sand, build a beach of reconnectivity, of ecology, of cooperation. Thank you.